You know, I'm not much of an expert on racing games or the wider aspects of car culture. I guess I'd probably refer to myself as a casual fan of the racing game genre, and I tend to enjoy cars based on their looks and design above all else. That said, I have played a good number of these games over the years, with franchises like Forza Horizon being right at the top of my list. I do think it's relevant to mention the fact that I'm 34 years old at the time of recording this review, and I've never learned to drive, mainly due to a combination of expense and predominantly my ill health. So with that in mind, I'm not really in a position to speak on things like realism, handling, and car physics. I'm experiencing and reviewing this game as a casual player, or perhaps a layman when it comes to cars. Despite that fact, and regardless of this being quite a small channel, EA did get in contact with me and they provided me with a review code for the PS5 Palace edition of the game, which was very kind of them. If I were to sum up Need for Speed Unbound in a few sentences, I'd say that it was fun to play for the most part, and graphically I do think it looks really nice, which by the way includes the graffiti style elements that you see around the cars. On the other hand though, due to my personal tastes, I really dislike all of the music in the game, and unfortunately the story feels like it was made by people who are trying to approximate how young people interact and talk. It comes off as extremely cringy to me, but we'll get into all of that later on. I went into this game with a pretty average expectation, and I'm happy to say that overall, those expectations were exceeded by a pretty large margin. So what is Need for Speed Unbound? Well, it's a stylistic open-world arcade racer which serves as a bit of a soft reboot for the series. Contrast seems to be the theme here, with cel-shaded character models and graffiti-style overlays during the races, all set against a realistic environment. There's a wide selection of cars to unlock and customize, as well as clothes for your created character and vanity effects that appear during the races. I'm not going to go into the narrative because stuff does happen pretty quickly and I don't want to spoil it for potential players. However, I will say some things about it in my personal opinion section later on. To understand what the game offers you, I think it's best to break it down into 3 parts. Those parts are the open world, the customization, and the racing itself. First, let's talk about the open world because it really does govern all of your progression, and it's important because the core gameplay loop revolves around it. So how does it work? Well, you're very quickly introduced to the game's day-night cycle, and depending on what time of day it is and what cars you have available to you, you'll be able to partake in various activities. You can just drive around freely in the world looking for collectibles, of course, but that's more of a side thing that you can do at any time. Daytime and nighttime have no time limit and will only move on if you go back to one of the game's safe houses, which you can unlock by completing certain missions. To give you a typical example, the idea is that you drive around the world completing events during the day in order to earn money. The thing is though, you'll also be gaining heat, which basically means the attention of the police. The more heat that you accumulate, the more the police will appear on the map and the more aggressive they'll be towards you in races and in the open world. Remember that money that I mentioned a moment ago? Well, it's not safe until you end the day and move into the night by entering a safe house. This permanently banks the money, but if at any time the cops bust you, you'll lose all of your unbanked cash. Furthermore, if you bank your money, the heat that you've acquired during the day will actually stay with you, making the nighttime inherently more risky. During the night itself, you can basically do the exact same things you could during the day, with the only difference being that you start with the heat from the day. After competing at night, you bank your money in the same way and progress the in-game time to the next day, at which point all of your heat is reset. It's essentially a risk and reward type of system that's designed to make you think about your next move. As you race around and explore the world, you'll discover breakable items such as billboards, collectible decals, and things like speed traps, drift zones, and mini time trials, all of which will reward you for your time. Next, let's go over the customization, and trust me when I say there's a lot of it. I won't go into every little thing because, frankly, we'll be here all day. First and foremost though, you've obviously got the ability to buy and acquire multiple licensed cars from the likes of Ford, Chevrolet, Ferrari, Honda, and many more. Every single car is highly customizable, from simple color swaps or material changes to decals, wraps, body kits, and a whole host of internal parts that improve performance. You can even spend some cash to upgrade the workshop itself, unlocking higher quality parts for purchase. Each car has a letter assigned to it that denotes its performance level, and this rating can be improved by upgrading the car with new parts. In turn, this allows access to higher caliber events where you can earn more money, which of course gives you the ability to buy even better parts. Lastly, we should briefly talk about the races themselves. There's a number of different race types, but the most common is a straight-up race against a group of NPC drivers. Some, but not all of the races require a buy-in, and if you want to, you can bet a small amount of cash against the other characters regarding the final position you take. During the races themselves, you'll be able to drift, head into oncoming traffic, draft, and create near misses to gain a nitros boost, which you can then use when you need to. Despite being an arcade racer at heart, the huge array of cars and upgrades for those cars results in a wide spectrum of handling profiles, making each one of them feel different to drive. As you've probably noticed in the in-game footage, pretty much anything you do in a race produces some sort of stylish addition to the graphics. It is worth pointing out though that this visual flair doesn't actually do anything for you, aside from make the game look a bit more interesting. In terms of performance on the PS5, the game runs at a dynamic 4K resolution, dropping to 1800p at its lowest, while at a strong 60 FPS. I've heard that the Series X version of the game isn't quite as stable, but at the same time, it doesn't drop as low as 1800p for its dynamic resolution, so that could very well be the reason for that. I had no bugs, glitches, crashes, or problems of any kind, and it was virtually a flawless experience. Need for Speed Unbound is available right now on PS5, Xbox Series consoles, and PC. This is a AAA release, so as you might imagine, physical copies are literally everywhere if you want them. So what are my personal opinions of the game? Well, as I said earlier, I'm definitely a casual racing fan, so it is kind of hard for me to say much about it from any position of automotive knowledge. Like, I can't tell you if the cars handle right or if the parts that you can buy are accurate, but I can tell you if I enjoyed it or not. And to be honest, yeah, you know what, I did enjoy it. I thought it was really fun, and I ended up being impressed by the contrasting graphical style, even though I was kinda skeptical of it at first. Funnily enough, I didn't even realize that this was an open world game when I accepted the review code. I'd seen a couple of trailers and I just kind of assumed that you picked a car, raced, and then upgraded that car as you progressed. So, you know, to be thrown into what I think is a nicely realized open world that you're free to explore came as a very welcome surprise. At night, I feel like some of the finer details get completely lost, which I suppose you might expect when it's dark, but during the day the environments look super clean, plus there's a good amount of traffic and pedestrians around which help to keep the place feeling more alive. From a technical standpoint, the entire game seems to have been put together with a great deal of care and attention, so credit where credit is due on that one. I'm pretty sure the game doesn't use any form of ray tracing, but I do think the reflections in things like puddles and on-car windows look really good. Under closer inspection, they may not actually be that great, but during normal gameplay, I felt like they really added to the feel of the world and the overall atmosphere. To be fair, the weather effects also played a big part in creating that same atmosphere. You know how in some games the weather is just kind of there, like it just exists and nothing more? It doesn't really feel right, it doesn't really feel real. Well, in this game, the rain falling onto my car and running down the sides of it felt actually tangible, like it was properly happening. The way it's done and the way it's implemented, it just feels very real to me. The moment-to-moment driving and racing felt pretty good as well, although there does seem to be a bit of rubber banding and artificial speed increases for the AI drivers, which I'm never a fan of. I mean, if I'm winning by a mile, just let me win by a mile. Don't basically cheat to increase the challenge. That kind of thing's always bugged me. It's funny because you can actually tell when opponents are boosting due to all of those graffiti effects, but there were loads of times when I boosted to catch up to another racer, only for them to speed up to match my boost, even though they weren't actually boosting. It's an annoying thing to experience because there were many times that I could have got a better final position in the race if they hadn't have done that. It's not a deal breaker and it's not, constant, but it does bother me when it happens. Unfortunately, the story and the music were just not to my tastes at all. I think the story, when taken on face value, is perfectly fine, but the characters, the writing, and the delivery of that story fell completely flat for me. I found the dialogue and the voice acting to be so cringe-inducing that I just had to turn it off entirely and rely on the subtitles. I'm sorry to say that I had a similar issue with the music, which is entirely hip-hop and rap, which I honestly just can't listen to for long. I turned off all of the game's music within about 30 minutes of playing it, and look, I mean no disrespect to anyone who likes hip-hop or rap or anything like that, I really don't. You see, I'm a metalcore fan and a guitar player, so genres like hip-hop and rap just end up being so far out of my musical preferences that they start to grate on me pretty quickly and I find it difficult to listen to. With all that said though, I need to be clear and say that the story and music being what they were didn't ruin the experience for me at all. It was more of a slight inconvenience, and to be honest, it's the cars, the customization, and the racing that's clearly the most important elements here. I was able to enjoy the game overall, regardless of the things that I didn't like, and those particular things are completely subjective anyway. I genuinely think this is a good racing game. I think it has some minor problems and a few quirks that I'm sure some people will dislike, but at the same time, I can't help but feel like this is a bit of a return to form for the series. In my opinion, Need for Speed Unbound is an unexpectedly good racing game, although that's coming from someone who doesn't know much about cars or racing for that matter. So take my opinions on this one with a grain of salt. I think the cars are enjoyable to drive, and I feel like you could lose hours of playtime in the customization alone. Visually, each and every car is modeled nicely, the environments look far better than I thought they would, and the day-night system where you gain heat and money is, at least for me, quite engaging. Ultimately, if you're a racing fan, I can't imagine that you'd have too much to dislike here. It's worth keeping in mind that it's geared more towards the arcade style of racing rather than simulation, but for players like myself, that won't be an issue. There's a good amount of content to chew on, and surprisingly, it does offer a decent amount of challenge even on the lowest difficulty settings. If you're at all interested in the game but aren't sure about it or don't trust it for whatever reason, I actually do think it's worth a buy. I reckon both hardcore and casual fans will find something to enjoy here, and considering that this is somewhat of a soft reboot for the series, I think it's worked out rather well. If you enjoy the video, I really hope you'll consider subscribing, and if you like what I do and want to help support the channel, please check out the first link in the video description down below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.